Chapter 11. A Puzzling Attitude. Bess's cry alerted Nancy. Just in time, she saw the reptile and quickly pulled in her hand, still holding the lily plant. "Oh!" Bess gave a huge sigh of relief. But the next moment, her fright returned. Nancy and George, too, were alarmed. The alligator, as if annoyed because he had been disturbed, turned, flipping his tail. It whacked the canoe so hard that the little craft almost overturned. Uncle Rufus stood up and hit the alligator's head with his paddle. The elderly man succeeded in stunning the alligator by hitting the vulnerable aperture behind the reptile's ear. Then Uncle Rufus sat down and began to paddle furiously downstream. "Whew!" George burst out. "I never want to get that close to such a beast again." "Nor I," said Bess with a shudder. "Oh, you're so brave, Uncle Rufus." The old Negro's face broke into a broad grin. "When you lives with gators all your life, you don't fool around with 'em," he said. When they reached the old man's cabin, the girls thanked him for his help, then returned to Sunny Mead in Nancy's car. There, tea was being served on the patio, and Mrs. Haver invited the girls to join the group. "My, but you all look mysterious," Donna May remarked. "Let me guess, you've been in the bayou." When Bess confessed that they had been, Alex added, "And I'd like to bet you've been to the showboat." "You're right," Nancy admitted. Before Alex could pursue the subject, she added, "The most exciting part of our trip was meeting an alligator." "Oh, how positively horrid!" Donna May exclaimed. The story was told in detail, and Nancy hoped that no further reference would be made to the showboat. But Alex had not forgotten it. "Well," he spoke up, "now that you've seen the River Princess, I'm sure you'll agree with me that it's a hopeless mess. There's no point in trying to move the boat from the bayou. It would be much too expensive." "But Alex, dear, what are we going to do about a place to hold the ball?" Donna May asked. "Don't you worry, honey," Alex said reassuringly. "I have a splendid idea. We can turn this house into a showboat." For a moment, the Havers and their daughter were stunned by the suggestion. But presently, as Alex explained how all the furniture could be moved from the living room and a stage erected at one end, they became interested. "If we can't have the real thing," remarked the Colonel, "I suppose we'd better start making plans immediately to decorate this place." The girls from River Heights, however, were extremely disappointed at this turn of events and took no part in the planning. They thought Alex's suggestion a poor substitute for the Colonel's original idea, and Nancy herself did not want to give up an unsolved mystery. Presently, Alex left the group to look over the living room and decide how he would dismantle it. Mrs. Haver mentioned to her visitors that the family had been invited to a neighbor's home to a dinner party the following evening. "Would you girls like to accompany us? You're invited," she said. "We'd love to, but the three of us have already made another engagement," Nancy told her hostess. "Why, how nice! But I didn't realize you knew anyone down here," said Mrs. Haver, and Donna May asked, "Where are you going?" Nancy told them about having met Charles Bartolome and the invitation to his home to dinner. Mrs. Haver, at first surprised, looked embarrassed when Donna May suddenly burst into tears and fled from the room. Excusing herself, the woman hurried after her daughter. "How odd," said George. "What ails Donna May, anyhow?" "Maybe we shouldn't have said anything about Charles to her," Nancy suggested. "Do you think we ought to turn down the invitation?" Bess asked. "It seems to have upset Donna May terribly, and we are guests here." "Of course we shouldn't give it up," her cousin said determinedly. "This is a good opportunity for us to find out more about the mystery of the showboat." As the girls quietly discussed the situation, Mrs. Haver returned and requested Nancy and her friends not to go to the Bartolomes. "Donna May is in hysterics," she said. "Nancy, suppose you go upstairs and tell her you've changed your mind." The young sleuth went to Donna May's bedroom. Expecting to find the girl in tears, Nancy was surprised to see the bride-to-be seated at her dressing table, putting on makeup. "Donna May," Nancy began, "I'm sorry that I—" "Oh, don't be sorry about anything," Donna May said airily, admiring her left profile in the mirror. "Go to the Bartolomes if you wish. It means nothing to me." Nancy was both perplexed and amused by the girl's seeming change of heart, but she was convinced that Donna May was putting on an act and that she was actually in love with Charles, only too proud to admit it. "You don't mind if we accept?" Nancy asked. "Certainly not," Donna May replied. "And please tell Mother for me." Nancy hurried downstairs. She met Mrs. Haver in the hall and gave her Donna May's message. The hostess forced a laugh and said, "Well, I'm glad that's straightened out." Just then, the telephone rang, and she went to answer it. A few moments later, Mrs. Haver came out to the patio, where Nancy had rejoined her friends. Their hostess said that Mrs. Bartolome had called to confirm the dinner invitation. "She'll expect you girls at 7. Later, when Nancy was alone in her own room with Bess and George, she told them of her conversation with Donna May and added her own thought that the girl was still in love with her ex-fiancé. "Then let's get them together again," Bess declared. Nancy smiled. "But first, let's solve the mystery. I want to show Mrs. Haver the lovely old hairpin I found." Knowing that their hostess always rested before dinner, Nancy waited until a few minutes before 7, then went to Mrs. Haver's bedroom and tapped lightly on the door. "Come in," the woman called. "Oh, how pretty you look," she said, admiring Nancy's powder blue eyelet-embroidered dress. "Thank you. Mrs. Haver, I have something to show you," Nancy said. She told the woman of her discovery and held up the hairpin. "Oh, how strange! How very strange!" Without another word, Mrs. Haver rushed to her bureau, opened a drawer, and took out a jewel box. She rummaged through it, and a few seconds later held up a hairpin very much like the one the young detective had found. "For a moment I thought the one you had was mine, Nancy," she said. "These two are almost identical. I wonder who could have dropped the other one." "So do I," Nancy confided. For the next 10 minutes, Nancy discussed the strange affair with Mrs. Haver, but neither could come to any conclusion. Finally, the two walked down the stairs to dinner. Donna May had completely recovered her composure. Her conversation was scintillating, and the Northern girls were amazed that her attitude had changed so quickly and so completely. Toward the end of the meal, Donna May smiled gaily and announced, "I have a wonderful surprise for you girls. Alex has invited all of us to New Orleans for a gala time tomorrow." Nancy, although she really would have preferred continuing her sleuthing, politely expressed her appreciation. She thought it advisable not to antagonize Donna May further. Bess said she was eager to see more of the city and eat at another famous restaurant. George, for her part, was suspicious of Donna May's motives. Later, as the girls were getting ready for bed, she said, "Nancy, we'd better take your car. This trip to town may be a trick to keep us there so late that we won't be back in time to go to the Bartolomes for dinner." "You could be right, George," Bess agreed. "But you know, I just can't figure out Donna May and the way she acts." George remarked with a great yawn, "Donna May just isn't herself since Alex came into her life. I think it's a shame." The girl's voice rose as she added, "She used to be such a swell person. Now she's a pain." "Shh," Nancy warned. "She may hear you." The following morning, Nancy awakened to a sunny day and the twittering chorus of birds. Going to a window, she stood there, breathing in the balmy, fragrant air and admiring the lovely gardens. Pappy Cole, a huge basket over his arm, was cutting flowers near the house. As Nancy went into her friend's room, the aroma of broiling ham and fresh-baked corn cakes wafted upstairs. "Get up, you sleepyheads," she said to Bess and George. "It's simply heavenly outside. Let's wear our skirt, blouse, and short sets today." "Will do," George replied, jumping out of bed and making a beeline for the shower. "Oh, don't rush me," Bess begged from her bed. "It's too delicious a day to hurry." Nevertheless, the girls were dressed in half an hour and went downstairs. As soon as breakfast was over, the young people met in the driveway. Alex had the station wagon ready and hopped out to assist the passengers. "Thank you," said Nancy, "but Bess and George and I are going in my car. We'll follow you." A look of annoyance creased the young man's forehead. "But why?" he asked. Bess put on an engaging smile. In a very convincing voice, she said with a giggle, "You two sweetie pies ought to be alone." To avoid any further objection, the girls hurried to Nancy's car. She followed Alex at a distance of about 30 feet all the way to New Orleans. Upon reaching the outskirts, she wondered why he did not go directly into the city. Instead, he turned and took a very circuitous route to reach the sightseeing area. "Nothing special here," George complained. "Just a lot of old houses on a deserted street." At that moment, a small wad of paper fluttered from Alex's car window. Nancy, wondering whether he had dropped it by accident, decided on a sudden impulse to stop and retrieve the paper. She pulled to the curb and George hopped out to pick it up. "This isn't anything special," George announced, climbing in and smoothing out the tiny sheet. "Just a funny drawing." The three girls gazed at a maroon-colored rectangle with a gold stripe running through it. There was no writing on the paper. Alex had stopped and now backed up to see what was detaining Nancy. She handed the paper to him out her window. "Did you mean to drop this?" she asked. "Oh, that," said Alex. "Kid cousin of mine drew it. I just found it in my pocket. I don't want it." He tossed the paper into the street and started off again. Once more, Nancy followed Alex, but as he turned a corner, she suddenly stopped the car. Opening the door, she got out. "Quick, George, take the wheel," she ordered. "I have some sleuthing to do. Meet you at 12 o'clock at Broussard's restaurant." Mysteriously, Nancy dashed back up the street. End of chapter 11.